In County Durham, a 3-bedroom house just went up for sale with a guide price of £10,000. That's not a fixer-upper fantasy, it's a real listing in a real former mining town, on a street where people still live, still shop, and still see the same GP surgery their parents used. Multiply that by dozens of towns like it across the north, Wales and Scotland, and a pattern shows up that's too big to be a fluke. Today we're counting down 10 of these towns, with real prices and the genuine reasons they're actually worth a look. And for everyone, we're saying the honest catch out loud, so you know exactly what you would be buying into. This channel shows Britain's property market the way it actually works, not the tourism board version. If you're tired of retirement videos that skip the hard numbers, subscribe now. Because every town here gets the real price and the real trade-off stated plainly, town by town. Let's get into it. Picture the two versions of this country that usually make it onto television. One version is London and the home counties, a terraced house in Surrey, priced high enough to buy 3 separate houses somewhere else. The other version almost never gets the same airtime, and it runs from the northeast down through the Welsh valleys and up into the Ayrshire coast, where the same money buys a whole house outright, with change left over for a car. Neither version is invented. Nationwide's own regional figures put the average home in the northeast at just under £165,000, against £525,000 in London. Southern England as a whole averages somewhere between £340,000 and £370,000. That gap isn't a rounding error, it's the entire premise of this video, written out in 3 numbers, and it repeats itself all along England's east coast too, in towns like Peterlee and Grimsby, both sitting well under £140,000. Here's the mechanism behind it, because the mechanism matters more than the mystery. A house doesn't get up and leave a town when the pit closes, the steelworks shuts, or the shipyard goes quiet. The building stays exactly where it was built, brick for brick. What leaves is the wage that used to support its price, so the number on the estate agent's board falls until it matches what the people still living there can actually afford. Not every empty home fits that story, and it's worth saying so plainly. Official figures show a good share of vacant homes are simply between tenants or between owners, cleaned and remarketed within weeks, which counts as empty on a spreadsheet but means nothing structural about the town itself. The homes we're covering today are a different category. England alone currently holds more than 1 million vacant homes altogether. The number sitting empty for more than 6 months has climbed past 300,000, over 14% higher than just last year, and more than 50% higher than a decade ago. Housing policy is also handled separately in England, Wales and Scotland, which is exactly why the prices below cross all 3 borders rather than staying inside one. The same pattern shows up in bigger cities too, if you know where to look for it. Hull sits close to £130,000 on average, Glasgow around £185,000, and Newcastle around £210,000. All of them are proper cities with proper hospitals, and none of them come anywhere near what a similar sized city commands in the south. That distinction between churn and structural cheapness is worth carrying into every entry on this list. Because it's the difference between a town that's simply affordable and a town that's actually been abandoned. Cheap doesn't mean the value disappeared. It means the market simply stopped updating the price of everything that's still standing there. Let's start where the numbers run the most extreme. Number 10, the Rhondda Valleys, South Wales. Some of the cheapest houses anywhere in England and Wales sit in a valley most people outside Wales couldn't point to on a map. Across villages like Tylerstown, Ferndale and Merthyr, average prices run between roughly £87,000 and £94,000, genuinely among the lowest anywhere in Britain, and well under half of what the same sized house would cost 2 hours away in Cardiff. These are real Victorian terraces, built row after row for the men who work the coal seams underneath them, climbing the hillside in tight, orderly lines that still give the valley its shape today. Small back gardens and old allotment strips run behind many of them, cut straight into the slope, A reminder that these streets were built for people who needed to grow their own food as much as they needed a roof. The Rhondda Heritage Park sits nearby on the site of a former colliery. And you can walk through the real winding gear and the real pit bars rather than a cleaned up reenactment that skips the hard parts of that history. Not far away in Merthyr Tydfil, flats average as little as £62,800, and the wider Rhondda Cynon Taff area still averages under £145,000. That gives you a sense of just how far this same pattern stretches across the valleys, rather than sitting in one lucky pocket. Set any of those numbers against the Welsh national average of around £215,000, and the valleys start to look less like an exception and more like the honest flaw of the whole country. The honest catch here is the terrain itself. These streets climb hills that weren't built with aging knees in mind, and the spread of shops, banks and pharmacies thins out compared with the bigger Rhondda towns further down the valley. It's a genuinely cheap, genuinely characterful place to live, provided the hills don't end up costing more than the house did. If the valleys aren't your pace, the exact same trick plays out just as well by the sea. Number 9, Mablethorpe, Lincolnshire. A proper stretch of golden sand and an entire English seaside town for less than the deposit on a one-bedroom flat in most of London. 3-bedroom homes here start from around £160,000, with the town average sitting closer to £189,000. That makes Mablethorpe one of the cheapest coastal towns on the whole Lincolnshire coast. Cheaper even than nearby Skegness and Boston. Mablethorpe sits inside the flat, wide-open fens country this channel keeps returning to. The kind of quiet, uncrowded coastline that never made it onto the postcards next to Cornwall or Devon. The beach runs for miles, backed by dunes rather than a promenade crowded with arcades. And that alone gives the town a slower, calmer rhythm than most seaside resorts its size. Nearby Skegness averages around £199,500, and Boston sits closer to £226,000. So Mablethorpe genuinely undercuts its closest neighbours, rather than just claiming to. Further inland, towns like Gainsborough sit even cheaper again, which tells you this stretch of the fens has more than one entry point for a tight budget. The honest catch is the calendar, not the coastline. A good share of the local economy leans on summer visitors, so several cafes, guest houses and shops scale right back once autumn arrives, and winters here can feel genuinely quiet. For a retiree who wants a lively high street every month of the year, that quiet stretch matters. For someone who actually wants the peace, it might be the entire appeal. And it's worth deciding honestly which of those two people you actually are before you commit to it. Cross the border now. Because Scotland plays this exact same game and plays it just as well. Number 8, Saltcoats, North Ayrshire. This is regularly named the cheapest coastal town in the whole of the United Kingdom, and it sits right on the Firth of Clyde with views across to the island of Arran. The average house price here runs around £96,500 in a town of just over 12,000 people. Saltcoats is one of the historic 3 towns alongside Ardrossan and Stevenston, and its name comes from something wonderfully literal. In the 16th century, King James V personally funded a salt panning industry along this shore, and monks from nearby Kilwinning Abbey had already been working coastal coal seams here since the 1200s. Porton Cross Castle stands a short drive along the coast, a 14th century tower with its own claim to Scottish royal history, and the sandy beaches that made this a popular seaside escape are still exactly where they always were. Nearby Eglinton Country Park and the wider Clyde Muirshiel Regional Park add proper walking country to the coastline itself, so the appeal here runs well past the beach. Ardrossan Harbour sits right next door too, running the ferry crossing over to Arran, which means the transport links stretch further than a single coastal rail line into Glasgow. The honest catch is Scotland's weather. stated plainly rather than danced around. The climate along this coast is genuinely temperate, which is a polite way of saying the reliably good stretch runs roughly from May to September, and a fair amount of the seafront trade scales with it. Outside that window, Saltcoats asks you to actually like a proper Scottish coastal winter, rather than simply put up with one. Back across into England now, to one of the pit villages that actually built the northeast in the first place. Number 7, Ferryhill, County Durham. A house here can cost less than most people's kitchen renovation. And that's not an exaggeration built for effect. The average price in Ferryhill sits around £72,000 to £75,000, with some individual streets averaging in the high 20,000s to low 30,000s in a town of just under 9,000 people. Ferryhill is a small, workable County Durham town sitting close to the A1 corridor, which keeps it genuinely connected rather than cut off. It has the kind of settled community feel that comes from generations of the same families staying put, rather than a town built purely as a commuter dormitory. It's an ordinary place in the best sense of that word, with a real high street, a real school and a real pub, at a price that would barely cover a deposit further south. Set that against a County Durham average of £160,000. And Ferryhill is running at less than half its own county's typical price. Neighbouring Ashington in Northumberland tells a similar story, with average prices sitting only a little higher, which suggests this isn't a one-town coincidence, so much as a whole belt of the northeast running at the same rate. The honest catch is the same one shared by most of its Durham neighbours. The high street has thinned considerably since the pits closed, and for bigger shopping trips or specialist NHS appointments, residents lean on nearby Darlington or Durham, rather than finding everything on their own doorstep. Next up is the town that puts an entire national park on your doorstep for the price of a car. Number 6, Merthyr Tydfil, South Wales. This is the southern gateway to the Brecon Beacons National Park, officially known today as Banno Brycheiniog, and it's also one of the cheapest towns anywhere in Wales. Average prices sit around £121,000 to £130,000, less than half of the average across Wales as a whole. Merthyr was once one of the most important iron-making towns on earth, and that history hasn't been quietly paved over. Tydfil Castle Museum and Art Gallery tells the story of that industry properly, and Joseph Parry's cottage preserves an 1820s ironworker's home exactly as it stood when Wales's best-known 19th century composer was born there. A few miles north at Pant, the Brecon Mountain Railway now runs along part of the old Brecon and Merthyr line. Bike Park Wales has turned the surrounding hills into one of the country's genuine outdoor draws, pulling in visitors who might otherwise never have found this side of the beacons at all. Cardiff sits within reach by both road and rail, close enough for a hospital appointment or a day out without needing to relocate a life around it, which matters more here than in the smaller valley villages further up this list. The honest catch is that a national park on your doorstep doesn't automatically fix a local job market. The tourism and outdoor pull here is real, but employment is still working through the long hangover of that industrial collapse, so that trade-off is best understood going in, rather than discovered later. If you've made it this far, tell us in the comments which of these 10 you would actually pack a van for, and hit subscribe if you want the rest of this list, along with everything else this channel covers. Back to the countdown, because the next entry puts a bishop's palace and a cast of hundreds on the same street as some of the cheapest houses on this whole list. Number 5, Bishop Auckland, County Durham. A bishop's palace, a summer outdoor show with a cast of hundreds, and one of the cheapest towns on this entire list. All in the same postcode. The average house price in Bishop Auckland sits around £78,000, comfortably inside the same cheap belt as Shildon and Ferryhill either side of it. Auckland Castle anchors the town, alongside its Faith Museum. And every summer Kinran stages a large-scale outdoor performance right on the castle grounds, drawing audiences well beyond what a town this size would normally expect to attract. It's the kind of cultural weight that punches noticeably above the town's population. And it gives Bishop Auckland a genuine identity beyond simply being affordable. Market stalls still set up in the town centre on trading days. A small but real sign that this remains a working town, rather than a museum piece propped up purely for visitors. Against the same £160,000 County Durham average mentioned earlier in this list, Bishop Auckland is sitting at less than half. The honest catch tracks its Durham neighbours almost exactly. The High Street has felt the same regional mining decline as Ferryhill and Shildon nearby. So day-to-day shopping still tends to mean a short trip to a larger town, even with a castle and a headline summer show sitting right on the doorstep. Now for the one seaside town on this list that actually costs more, and the reason deserves a proper explanation. Number 4, Llandudno, Conwy. This is the priciest entry on the whole list, and it's still less than half of what the same house would cost in London. The average price in Llandudno runs around £210,000 in a town of roughly 19,700 people. Recent retirement rankings have named it the UK's strongest overall package for affordability, healthcare, safety, and quality of life combined. Llandudno is a proper Victorian seaside resort, built with a mile-long promenade and grand hotels facing straight out to sea. The Great Orme Headland rises dramatically at one end of the bay, its own old-fashioned cable-hauled tramway still carrying visitors to the summit. It carries the settled infrastructure of a town this size, meaning established NHS services and a genuine range of shops rather than a handful of essentials. Compare it to Whitby at around £235,000 or Alnwick at around £240,000. Llandudno still comes out as the better value ticket among Britain's genuinely well-regarded retirement coastal towns, and that value runs deeper than the price tag alone. The honest catch is simply the price tag, and this video won't pretend otherwise just because the rest of the list runs cheaper. You're trading the rock bottom numbers from the valleys and the pit villages for more polish, more services, and a livelier town centre. And that trade-off is worth naming honestly rather than burying it under the view. Back to the cheap end now for a town whose place in British history goes a lot further than simply being affordable. Number 3, Shildon, County Durham. This town didn't just get a railway built nearby at some point in its history. This is where the modern railway effectively began. Shildon regularly gets named the cheapest town in the entire UK, with average prices running between roughly £62,000 and £74,000 in a town of just under 10,000 people. Timothy Hackworth's wagon works here built locomotives for the Stockton and Darlington Railway. And in 1825, Locomotion No. 1 hauled the very first passenger train ever to run on a public railway, setting off from Shildon itself. Today, Locomotion, a free site run by the National Railway Museum, sits a few minutes' walk from Shildon Station. It houses the genuine engines and carriages that trace directly back to that moment, alongside the old Soho shed and goods shed buildings that still stand from the original works. Timothy Hackworth's own house next door has been preserved as a museum in his name, which means the whole story sits within easy walking distance rather than scattered across several sites. Set against that same £160,000 County Durham average, Shildon runs at under half. In the town that arguably gave the entire country its railway network in the first place. The honest catch is that the town centre has struggled since the railway works and the surrounding collieries wound down, much like its neighbours further along this list. Residents still travel to Bishop Auckland or Darlington for bigger shops and more specialist services, even with a piece of world railway history sitting a few streets over. If a railway town like that impressed you, wait until you hear who else has quietly settled 2 hours from Glasgow. Number 2, Cumnock, East Ayrshire. The King himself has personally backed the restoration of the estate next door and the town beside it remains one of the cheapest in the whole of Scotland. Average house prices in Cumnock sit around £83,700, with three-bedroom homes averaging closer to £113,600, making it one of the most affordable towns in the whole of Britain by some rankings. Dumfries House sits just outside town, an 18th century Palladian house built from 1754 by the Adam brothers James, John and Robert. The 2,000 acres around it have been restored under a campaign backed by King Charles III, complete with a walled garden, an ice house and the ruins of Terraces Castle scattered through the grounds. The estate's own history reaches further back too, since James Armour, who later became Robert Burns's father-in-law, reportedly worked on the estate, tying this quiet Ayrshire town to Scotland's national poet, as well as its current monarch. Cumnock still carries a strong Victorian character in its older streets, the kind of period architecture that usually comes with a much steeper price tag elsewhere. East Ayrshire as a whole has been named the single most affordable area in the entire UK for first-time buyers, which says something about the wider region Cumnock sits inside. The honest catch is that reasonable commuting links into Glasgow don't erase Cumnock's own post-industrial story. This was a mining town before it was anything else, and the local job market remains thinner than the grand estate next door might suggest to a first-time visitor. And at number 1, the smallest town on this whole list holds an art collection that most national galleries would envy. Number 1, Barnard Castle, County Durham, a market town of just over 5,000 people, holds paintings by Goya, El Greco and Canaletto, and it's still one of the more affordable places on this entire list. The average house price here sits around £220,000, the second highest on this countdown, and still a fraction of the southern England average explained at the start of this video. The Bowes Museum anchors the town. Purpose-built in 1892 for John Bowes and his wife, Josephine Chevalier. It holds more than 58,000 objects across 22 galleries, including paintings that most cities many times this size would be proud to claim as their own, alongside ceramics, textiles and clocks collected across an entire lifetime. The town itself takes its name from an actual medieval castle, first raised by Barnard de Balliol in the 12th century. Its ruins still stand above the River Tees, giving Barnard Castle a sense of depth that no amount of marketing could manufacture from nothing. Free parking sits right by the museum entrance. A small detail, but one that matters more than it should once you're planning trips around mobility rather than convenience alone. The honest catch is priced in already. Barnard Castle costs more than its Durham neighbours further up this list, and rural Teesdale means fewer bus routes and a longer drive to a major hospital. A real consideration at this stage of life rather than a minor inconvenience to wave away. That's the whole pattern laid bare. From a valley in South Wales to a museum in rural Durham. 10 different towns, 10 different reasons, and one repeated cause underneath every single one. The price fell because the population and the industry that once needed these houses moved on. Not because the towns themselves ran out of anything worth having. The people who actually move to towns like these are rarely fantasy buyers chasing a bargain for its own sake. They're pensioners whose money now stretches twice as far. People who want a real high street and a real GP surgery without a 6-figure mortgage hanging over the rest of their retirement. Every entry on this list got its honest catch stated on purpose, because that's the only way any of it's actually useful to someone making a real decision rather than someone just daydreaming through a video. Tell us in the comments which of these 10 you'd actually pack a van for, and subscribe for the next list where some of these same industries vanish so completely that the towns went with them.